Hi there, I'm Craig Wilson, Curator of History for Mackinac State Historic Parks, and today I'd like to take a quick look at another one of the photos out of the album of Edward Pratt. You'll remember that Pratt was assigned to Fort Mackinac with the 23rd Regiment of Infantry from 1884 to 1890. Now, this image is titled simply East Blockhouse, and that's in fact what you see off there in the distance. The East Blockhouse and the North Blockhouse were actually built by American soldiers in 1797 and 1798, soon after they arrived at Fort Mackinac. And those blockhouses were originally intended to bolster the fort's defenses out on the north side. Now, as you look closer at the blockhouse, you can probably see all those small holes. Those are loopholes for firing muskets or rifles through. And you might also be able to see a larger porthole. There's one of those on each wall of the upper floor. Originally, there would have been cannons mounted behind those doors because these blockhouses were intended as fighting positions and essentially as forts within the fort. They're actually 3 stories tall. We can see 2 stories in this photo, and then there is also a basement level below. And originally, they were supposed to be a place where soldiers could not only fight, but also live if necessary. These served as barracks and living spaces. Although they were originally built for defense, as time went on and Fort Mackinac became less and less important as a military outpost, those 2 blockhouses, as well as the smaller West Blockhouse, which was added a little bit later on, became less important as fighting positions. And in fact, by the 1880s, the North Blockhouse had actually been converted into a water tower, supplying running water to most of the buildings inside the fort, and the other 2 blockhouses were just used for storage. So as we look towards the foreground of the image, the very large object that you see kind of dominating there is a 10-inch mortar. So this is a very large piece of artillery. It's a short-barreled weapon. You can see it's at a fixed 45-degree angle. It's designed to fire those very large shells that are stacked up around it in a high arc. Those shells you can maybe see have some holes in them. The larger holes would be where you could insert a fuse that would burn down while that shell was in flight, and then hopefully it would explode at a certain point after it had flown a good distance. But again, by the 1880s, none of this stuff would have been used. This mortar, just like the rest of Fort Mackinac's artillery, was very much obsolete by that time. But even if it's not used, it is rather picturesque, and it kind of adds a military flavor to Fort Mackinac despite its distinct lack of military importance by the time this photo was taken. Now, this image is kind of unique because it does appear to be a candid shot, and there are a few of these scattered throughout the photo album, but there are a lot more staged commercial photos, so something that you could go out and buy maybe as a souvenir of your vacation. But this one and a few of the others, especially the ones from Fort Mackinac, do appear to be a bit more candid, and they actually show the soldiers at work, so they're not out on the parade ground for some sort of formal occasion, all in their dress uniforms or anything like that. You see these 4 soldiers just going about their everyday duties, and they appear to be on police duty, so essentially just working on maintaining and cleaning the grounds of the fort. You can see that 3 of the soldiers have brooms or rakes. One of the men is actually sitting in a wheelbarrow, and they're not actually wearing their complete uniforms. This is something else that makes this photo kind of unique. You can see the men have sort of dressed down. Well, 2 of the soldiers wear their regulation forage caps. The other 2 men wear their tan campaign hats. This is a style that's first authorized in 1883, and it's primarily for use on campaign. So if you're going to be out in the sun for a long period of time, but they would also wear it for work details such as this one. So as you look more closely at the 2 men standing with tools on the path, we can actually start to get a sense perhaps of what the soldiers would be wearing under their uniform coats. Both of these men appear to not be wearing their uniform blouses, especially the man on the right. You can actually see his suspenders. And both of those men appear to have on the blue flannel overshirts that were first added to a soldier's uniform in 1883. The Army adopted a whole layering system with a variety of different undergarments, and that man standing on the left may also be displaying the gray undershirt that actually went over that blue overshirt. You can kind of see his sleeve rolled up there and maybe a lighter colored garment on his forearm. Now, as I mentioned, these soldiers, especially the 3 of them on the right, appear to be performing some sort of police duty, which, again, is really just cleaning the buildings and grounds of the fort. Every soldier would have been assigned to that on a pretty regular basis. But the presence of that fourth soldier standing off to the left maybe raises some other questions, because you'll note that he does appear to have his cartridge belt on, he appears to be wearing his uniform blouse, and he does also appear to have his rifle with him. And that may indicate that he's actually a member of the guard detachment, and the three men holding tools may be prisoners. They're at work under charge of the guard. That was a sentence that could be passed down by a court-martial. There were regular courts-martial taking place at Fort Mackinac, trying soldiers for a whole variety of pretty minor infractions. Those soldiers might be sentenced to spend a few days in the guardhouse. They might have to forfeit some of their pay, but they could also be sentenced to hard labor under charge of the guard. And that is perhaps what we're actually seeing here. That soldier with his rifle may actually be guarding these men while they're at work. Unfortunately, it's unclear. We can't really tell. They're a little bit too far away. They might just be members of the regular everyday police detail, but it is an interesting possibility to consider that these men are in fact prisoners. So just a few other quick things to take a look at. One of the big things that you'll notice as you look at the wall on either side of the blockhouse, it's not the nice wooden palisade that we've reconstructed up there. Again, it's just a nice little white picket fence. The Army was not at all concerned about attack or people getting into the fort by the 1880s, so they had really kind of stepped down a lot of those defensive measures. As I mentioned earlier, the blockhouses weren't really used for defense anymore. They were used for storage, and they really didn't even need a wall around this part of the fort anymore by that time. Well, that's just another quick look at an image out of the photo album of Lieutenant Edward Pratt. Again, that entire photo album with annotations, just like we've been talking about here, will be available for sale at our museum stores and gift shops later this summer. It'll be published under the title of Through an Officer's Eyes, the photo album of Edward B. Pratt, U.S. Army, 1873 to 1902. Hope you get a chance to check out that brand new book from Mackinac State Historic Parks, and that you do also have a chance to come visit us at Fort Mackinac and see some of these locations for yourself.